Lindenhurst is a village of 27,000 on the south shore of Long Island, New York. These are the people who grew up there and their stories. Everyone I know is from Lindenhurst.
Okay, we're here with our friend Nick. Thank you so much for having us over your place.
Of course.
We were chatting a little bit before. You've been in this apartment for 2 years now. Mm-hmm. You did not grow up in Lindenhurst, though.
I did not.
You are a Massapequa native.
I'm Massapequa. Relocated to New York City for about a decade, and then came back to the island almost 2 years ago, and am now in Lindenhurst. Happily so. Yeah.
So let's get a little origin story on you before we get into your book and all the revelations through the book. Tell us a little bit about growing up, and how your family ended up on Long Island. Are they also Long Island natives, or?
They are. Although I guess both my mom and my dad, I think they moved to Long Island when they were like 2 or 3 years old, both from Brooklyn. And I have a pretty big family. My dad's one of 9 kids. Almost all of them live in or near Massapequa still. And then my mom is one of 3, and both my aunt and uncle on that side grew up in Massapequa, and we had very tight-knit families, backyard barbecues and get-togethers pretty often. But they've since kind of moved away. So one lives in New York City now, and then the other lives down in North Carolina. But I've always been in close proximity to Long Island, even when I haven't actually lived here.
Yeah. And did you have siblings that you grew up with?
Yes. So I have
at the time.
Yeah. So I have a younger brother and then a younger non-binary sibling. My brother lives in Massapequa with his wife, and they have a young daughter that's 2.5. And then my other sibling lives in Bushwick. So we're all pretty close still.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. And what did your parents do for a living?
My dad was a banker on Wall Street. He worked for Deutsche Bank for a couple decades, so he was very tied into the whole financial world. And then my mom, she's had a number of random occupations over the years. Most of her job was raising us as we were kids, but she's done background acting. She's taught yoga to children at hospitals. She's run her own coffee shop. So she's done a little bit of everything. But yeah, that's kind of what the setup was growing up.
Okay.
Yeah.
What were you into as a kid? Were you playing sports or?
I was big into sports. Big basketball guy. As you can see, I have a Knicks hat out on. Big Knicks fan.
Playing the Raptors right now.
Exactly. Yeah. And a big football fan as well.
Giants or Jets?
Giants.
That's the right answer.
Although I am happy to root for the Jets as well, but the Giants definitely come first. And I was big into music. Still am big into music as well. I went to every single music festival in the country that you can think of, even ones outside the country. I DJ now as well, so I kind of have a hand in some of that scene in Brooklyn. Yeah, music and sports were kind of my 2 big things, which sometimes kind of seem like an odd pairing, but that's what I've always leaned into.
Yeah, I mean, it's not as unusual as you'd think.
No, I had rock and Jock Jam CDs.
Yeah. I guess it's what I'm alluding to is like the jocks of the world are not often, leaning heavily into music, and vice versa as well.
It's interesting. I'm noticing this now, with Gen Z and younger. It doesn't seem like music is like influencing the culture at large. Like it used to. Mm-hmm. Like we all remember how much hip hop culture and grunge and all that just had a stranglehold on, and everybody wore the slang that people spoke and all that. It doesn't seem that way with kids now. It's kind of homogenized.
I think so.
Yeah.
And I think maybe part of that is because a lot of music these days, it's harder to make something that feels fresh and original. A lot of what can be done with music has already been done. That's not to say there can't be original stuff that comes out. Yeah. There always is if you look hard enough. But the stuff that kind of gets the airplay, it's all been said and done before.
Right. It's not like the kids that are going to wear Sabrina Carpenter shirts to school. I don't know. I don't know what I'm saying. I don't know what kids
No, but it's
do.
like there's kids who are into it. It's just like it's a thing it's just there, and, as opposed to like it was everything for us growing up.
Yeah, but it also seems, and I'm saying this as someone who DJs, it feels like no one's really forming bands anymore the way that they used to.
Right.
It's all shifted towards this like DJ culture or just producing from your bedroom. Yeah.
So, getting into like a junior high school, what was your friend group like, and like thinking about college and your future, what kind of brought you to your career currently?
I was definitely hanging out with the sports crowd and the people who were on the basketball team, the football team, which it's kind of funny to look back on that because that's not who I've turned into at all today. But that was definitely my scene growing up. So any varsity sporting event, I was there. And that even led me to study sports management as a major in college. So the whole sports, passion that I had, it stuck with me for a while. But I think after my first job, which was working for the New York Mets, I started to shift away from that. I realized that a career in sports was not maybe what I really wanted in the end.
What did you do for the Mets?
Well, that's part of the reason why there may have been that shift away from it, is because I was selling tickets, like season tickets for the Mets, who at the time were
not the best,
horrible, and they had just
pre-Steve Cohen.
I'm not sure, but it was the second season that Citi Field was open.
Gotcha.
So they had these sky-high ticket prices because
Yeah.
the stadium was brand new, but the team was awful.
Yeah.
So it was a tough gig. But it was a fun one because I used to get free tickets all the time, and my friends who were baseball fans would just be,
Got the VIP.
yeah, I
treatment,
was like
yeah.
the cool guy in town, just dishing out free tickets to everybody. But yeah, it was a tough gig, and that was sort of the end of my feeling strongly about continuing down that whole path of sports being at the forefront.
Okay, so what came next as far as a career shift?
After that, I started getting more focused on restaurants and helping them find creative ways to bring in new business. So that started with a sales gig that I had with a catering, I would call it like a catering middleman almost. They would team up with different restaurants throughout New York City and find big offices and companies that were serving their employees breakfast, lunch, or dinner and match them up so that these small independent mom and pop restaurants could, put big catering orders together for these offices.
Okay.
So that's how that started me down the restaurant path. I eventually created my own business, which was a mobile app that allowed people to redeem complimentary appetizers at certain restaurants that we teamed up with in New York City. It actually was a bit of a success. We raised a good amount of money off of it, had a big marketing push that was set to go out to bring users into our whole app that we built, and then the pandemic hit. And our whole concept was built around
People going to restaurants.
exactly, yeah. So that was sort of a knockout punch to 4 years of entrepreneurial work that I had put in. And yeah, I didn't quite finish the whole restaurant thing after that. I then moved on to another company that was focused on like online ordering for restaurants. And that's kind of where we're at today. I don't work for that company anymore.
Okay. But you're still in that field.
Still in the hospitality space, yeah.
Okay. You're going back and forth from here into the city at the time? Or?
In my early 20s, yeah. But then I moved into Manhattan, or I think it was 25 at the time. And then bounced around a few different neighborhoods in Manhattan, moved to Brooklyn, lived in Bushwick for a little bit, and then settled in Greenpoint for a few years, which is where my wife and I moved into our first apartment together. And there's some other spots that I had lived in as well, but that's the bulk of my city living years before I moved back to the island.
Which is where I met you. So we met, were working on your book at Mooney's, the local coffee shop here.
Yep.
And my friend Jessica, who's very gregarious, was curious about what you were doing, and you told us a little bit about your story and what you were writing about, and you finally finished the book. Yep. So this is getting into like your late 30s. For your birthday, you received a 23andMe test as a gift.
Yep.
And it revealed something very surprising.
Yes. Yeah. So that's a good way to kick it off. So the way this whole story began was on my 36th birthday. My younger siblings got me this 23andMe kit that we had always talked about doing. It was not something that was like a total surprise for me to have received. But the huge surprise, the surprise of my life, was after I was given that as a gift, my parents sat me down to have a conversation to inform me that if I were to move forward with taking the test, there could be some pretty shocking revelations. The reason that I put it that way is because they went through a process when I was conceived where they had a donor who they had his sperm, but it was mixed with my dad's sperm. I don't know if they still do this, but the whole thinking behind that, at least back in the 80s, was that if they mix the sperm of the father and the donor, it gives the parents the illusion that there's a possibility that the child could be biologically connected. Now, I say that, it's something that I don't think is really rooted in science.
Right.
However, my brother was conceived through the same fashion and is biologically connected to our father. So
Okay.
it did work in his case.
Yeah.
So he had some strong ones.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. 2.5 years after I was conceived, I guess my dad's sperm juiced up a little bit.
Gotcha.
Is that your only sibling?
I have
You have
two.
your other-
Okay.
Yeah, my other younger sibling. So I get this gift. I have this conversation with my parents, and I'm just in shock. My world turned upside down.
Yeah.
Now, I didn't know if I was actually not related to my dad when they talked to me about this. But when they broke the news that it was a possibility, there's two things that stand out. The first thing is I said to my parents, this changes nothing.
Yeah.
No matter what the results could reveal, it doesn't change anything, related to our relationship. But the second thing I thought was, how do my parents feel?
Right.
For some reason, I put the focus on them because for whatever reason, my thought was, I'm 36 years old, and you guys have known that this is a possibility my entire life.
Right, and you've just decided to not.
Right, you guys
Mention it.
turned a blind eye to it because
Slipped your mind.
You didn't know, for sure one way or the other.
Right.
But it's always been present in their life and my life too.
Obviously, something they dealt with, in conceiving you and your brother as well.
Right. So yeah, I guess I just thought, wow, it's not that this was something you kept secret necessarily, although it kind of is. It's more just ignoring a potential reality,
Right.
like a potential truth. And I just couldn't fathom that for myself.
Yeah.
And I was
Obviously, I don't know. I've never met the rest of your family. I don't know how much you resemble them, but there could have been some genetic, obvious differences.
for sure.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny looking back in hindsight because even before any of this was on my radar, I would always say oh, I'm on my mom's side.
Yeah.
I didn't get much of my dad's side. It was to the point where my brother and we lived together for a few years in New York City. And whenever we'd meet new people for the first time, if we were throwing a party at the apartment, we would stand next to each other and make a joke can you believe we're brothers? And the person that's meeting us for the first time kind of looks at us and squints their eyes and is like, I can kind of see it, but they were usually just being polite about it. So I think intuitively, maybe we knew something. We didn't have the complete picture, but it was never to the extent that we took it seriously and said, wait, we need to investigate this further.
So
Yeah.
I have a similar story, not with a parent, but I took an Ancestry.com test, and they do DNA matches on there where you can see other people that have public Ancestry profiles, how close their DNA markers match yours. And it said I had a first cousin I had never heard of So I showed my sister, and I was like, who the fuck is this? And it had a picture, and it looked like my sister. I was like, I don't know. And we messaged her, and without getting into it too much, an uncle on my father's side had a child before he was married. And that is my cousin, secret cousin, basically, on, that family. Right. So kind of crazy in that respect. But, like, how do you come to find out, like, I guess, what's the next part of your story then?
Yeah. So
what does the test reveal?
Well, before we get there, after my parents had that conversation with me, they had also had the same conversation with my brother 2 days prior, separately. And we had to decide if we wanted to take the test.
Yeah.
So my brother right away was like, I'm taking it. He has a young daughter. He wanted to have the medical history clarified. And I, for whatever reason, needed a night to just sit with it all and process it, because it's like a bomb goes off.
Yeah, of course.
It's huge.
But the next morning, I was like, no, I'm finding out like as soon as possible. And I remember having a conversation with my parents because I was adamant about knowing the results, and my dad took an opposite approach where he was like, I don't know that I need to know the results. And I was like, well, if I'm going to know the results, there's no way I can keep that from
live
you.
that without telling you.
So there was a period of time where it was trying to manage everyone's willingness to have the truth fully come to light. Mm-hmm. And then there are other decisions that needed to be made further down the line around, are we going to share this? All that kind of stuff. But when the results come in, that was about a month after I took the test. I was living in my Greenpoint apartment. My wife and I, we had the app open as soon as the results were in. And during the lead up, I had kind of settled on the likelihood that my dad and I were not biologically connected. So I was pretty prepared for that. He and I don't really look alike at all. Our personalities are a little bit different as well. But what I wasn't prepared for at all was my ancestry report, when I opened it up, said I was like 46.6% Ashkenazi Jewish.
There you go.
Which, up until that day,
you had no idea.
I never thought that was part of my life. I always thought I was half Irish, quarter Italian, quarter German. So I get that news that I'm half Jewish. And then I look at the family tree that's in 23andMe, and there's 13 additional half siblings that I never knew about. So that was another level of shock that I don't really think I had considered going into it. I thought maybe, all right, there might be a couple other random ones, but then I saw 13 and was like, whoa. And then on top of that, from the donor side, the only connection other than the half siblings that we had was the first uncle, and he didn't have his full name in there. The donor's position was blank. So I was like, okay, now what? And
in your head, is that like the half siblings? He is a prolific donor, so
it's kind of like right at the edge for me in terms of comfort, I guess.
Sure.
Like, I definitely didn't expect to see that many, but at the same time, I'm also familiar with some of those documentaries where it's like, donors are, fathering over 100 children.
Well, I know it's a really strict criteria to become a donor, so they're probably using a lot of that person's seed,
Right.
But also, who knows what that was like 30, I don't know how old you are, but 40 years ago.
Yeah. Well, there were no real rules back then, and there's really no real rules today either. There's no limit on how many times somebody can donate. There's no legislation related to the anonymity factor, which is a big issue in my opinion. I'm lucky because through some detective work of the half siblings, they were able to pin down who the donor was. I don't know how, because they didn't really have too many clues, but they figured it out. But there's a lot of people out there who are in the same position as me and just are living in this cloud of mystery of one of life's most fundamental questions. Like, where do I come from? Who do I come from? So, next parts of the story. So I have these results. I'm like shocked, obviously. I FaceTime my brother. I FaceTime my parents to inform them. And within an hour or so, I get a message from one of the half-sisters who is like, hey, I'm so-and-so. If and when you're ready, I have more information on our situation if you're interested. And I was just like, hit me with it. Like, I'm ready for this. So she ended up sending me details on the donor. There were 2 emails that were exchanged between him and some of the half-siblings where he basically reveals the medical history, his parents and grandparents' history. So I got a good amount of information, at least the vital stuff up front, like within an hour. So that really put me at ease. But in that hour leading up to that message coming through,
Yeah, the most anxiety in the world.
yeah, I was like, all right, where do I even begin? Like, is this guy alive still? Is, what's his deal? I don't know. So I was fortunate that I got a lot of clarity pretty quickly. But it still didn't change the fact that it rocked my world.
Yeah.
And still does to some extent. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
pretty at ease with it these days. But yeah, I mean, it was as shocking of an event as I could possibly imagine. I mean, I couldn't imagine it. It was just like, it's like this psychedelic trip almost, where I'm just...
And how did
trying to
your
process.
parents react to it?
My dad, as I mentioned before, he was a little bit reluctant in the beginning to just move towards being open with it. Whereas my mom was like, the cat's out of the bag now. Like, we can't just pretend
Yeah.
like this isn't a thing. So, yeah, that's what the early stages of this felt like. And then things began to progress, where I'm now connecting with the half-siblings that are showing up, sending them messages on the 23andMe app, trying to get their stories.
So were they local to here?
So all of them are from Long Island.
Gotcha.
We all come from the same hospital.
Gotcha.
In Mineola. So that's the common thread here. And it's where the donor did his medical practice. So, yeah, then once all of that information was presented, it was kind of like this choose your own adventure story that I found myself in, where it's like, all right, do I keep digging further into this, or do I just stop now and, act as if it's not going to be part of my life? As you can see, now that there's a book about this, I chose to explore it to as full of an extent as I could. And that basically meant engaging with the half-siblings more deeply, setting up plans to meet them in person, which happened, I want to say, maybe a month or 2 after the results had come in, which is pretty quick, I think, because the 2 of them who I met first had known about all this stuff.
That's what I was going to ask. How many of them had met prior to you entering this scenario?
Yeah, good question. So there were 3 that had met up before.
And what's the age range around your own age?
I, as far as I know, am the oldest.
Okay.
That we know of.
Right.
I could get an alert right now that says
Yeah.
there's another sibling that just popped
Yeah.
up. So I'm the oldest. January of '87 is when I was born, and then the youngest I think is maybe like 1990.
Okay.
So it's a couple years that we're all
You
spread
had a
out.
3-year three-peat.
Yeah, yeah. So and doing the quick math that I've been able to do, it seems like there are 8 unique donations from the donor.
Gotcha.
That we are aware of. So I don't personally find that to be a totally outrageous number.
No.
But if that number kept creeping up, more and more over the years.
8 samples can make 13 children, though, so that's kind of...
Right.
Yeah.
So, and good that you're thinking that way,
Yeah.
because there's a set of triplets, and then there's 2
Wow.
pairs of twins that are involved.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you were able to finally meet all 13 of them?
No, I have met, I want to say 5
Okay.
of them. So there are some of the half-siblings who have not been totally open to connecting. They each have their own reasons. This is the kind of thing that it can be really traumatic for people. I find myself to maybe be in the minority where it's it's been probably the greatest positive of my life, discovering all of this. But it can be a really hard thing, not just for the half siblings that I haven't met,
The
but
parents or whatever the family was going through that they needed to get the donation in the first place.
right.
Yeah.
And then there's the idea of having to come clean on, a secret that
It's not something people are prepared for ever.
It's decades long, and that can be really challenging for people. That's not necessarily the reason why some of the half siblings I'm connected to have chosen not to engage much. But I have met, I want to say 5 of them over 3 separate occasions. And we keep in touch. We send each other messages every now and then. It's not like we're getting together for holidays or anything like that. But we have another meetup that's on the books for later this month.
Do you have a resemblance to any of them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that was one of the trippiest things the first time I met 2 of the half brothers, is I'm meeting these strangers and I'm catching glimpses of myself in their faces.
Mannerisms and all that.
And the mannerisms.
Yeah.
One of them dressed exactly like I did, had the same facial hair, had the same sense of humor. So
It's amazing how those things are like biologically coded.
yeah.
Instinct, that
I forget the name of that documentary about the triplets that didn't know that they were triplets.
yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
3 identical strangers.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So on one hand they're strangers, and then on the other hand they're biologically as connected to me as my brother and younger sibling that I grew up with are.
So at what point do you start on the book?
It was pretty early on, although I never knew it was going to be a book until at least I would say 6 or 7 months into writing. The one thing that was just crystal clear to me as all of this information was being presented to me, and as I was exploring these relationships with the half siblings, was that I had to write about it. I've never written a book before. I've barely even written other published articles. I don't think I've been published in anything actually, other than my own Medium little bits that I'll put out there every now and then. But it was a very strong feeling that came on pretty early on as I was writing it, or writing just for the sake of writing. I don't know if maybe it was a therapeutic thing subconsciously for me to just get all this information down, or if it was a historical, just making sure this
A record of it?
this record exists for, decades down the road. And then, I would say at a certain point through my travels. So my wife and I, we went to Asia. We did a Vietnam, Thailand, and Laos trip at the end of last year. And during that trip, I had my journal with me and I was writing, and I started to uncover some connections to how I was feeling on the other side of the world and how I was feeling in my own body, which was kind of foreign to me in a way. I was rediscovering who I was, and also having this experience in a foreign territory that, I don't know, there was just some overlap there that pushed me even further towards the writing side of things. And then I came to a point in my working career where I was in between jobs, and I had about 4 months where I was just looking for work, but I really devoted that time to finishing what I had written and actually turning it into a full-fledged book, which, I mean, thinking about college assignments where it's you got to write 3,000, 4,000 words on this, that was the most daunting thing to me as I was, a student. But now I'm here holding a book that is 60,000 words, and I wrote it as if, it didn't even feel like I wrote it.
No,
it was
poured out of you.
Yeah, it was something channeled this through me, and now it exists. And
They say, write what you know, right?
yeah. Well, you hear this with musicians too,
Yeah.
where they're like, I didn't write that song. It just came to me, and now here it is.
Yeah.
And it was the same kind of experience that I had with this book, because ask me to write anything more than a few thousand words on any other subject matter, it would be the biggest challenge in the world for me. But this, I guess because it's this reintroducing myself to the world, that came natural.
And did you get any coaching on it, on your writing, or any advice from anyone? who's more experienced as a writer?
Really. I mean, the whole North Star for me as I was writing this was to write from the heart and just put the truth out there in a way that felt it felt like I said before, like I was reinventing and reintroducing myself. So it reads like a journal, perhaps. But I didn't have any coaching with my writing. I had inspiration for sure. I mean, I'm watching Anthony Bourdain almost on a nightly basis. Like that's my default show to put on, and he's a writer. Mm-hmm. So even his television shows are through the lens of a writer's point of view. So that is definitely influential. I have an aunt who wrote a book who also was inspiring to me. But ultimately, I think the person who had the biggest effect in getting the book to the next level was the editor that I had found on Fiverr, which is like a freelance website for any number of assignments that you could be looking for help with. This guy, Josh Rivedal is his name. I took a chance on him. I really just went based off of like his social media profiles and just felt like his vibe and his energy synced with what I was trying to do. And he really helped raise my writing to the level that you'll find in the book.
Yeah, and it's self-published through Amazon?
Self-published through Amazon, although it's also distributed through the retailers that Ingram Spark is associated with. Right. They're like, I don't know if I guess it's a third-party distribution company that also does print. Like, I've ordered my copies of the book from Ingram Spark. But they'll put the book out to like Barnes & Noble, Target, and some other retail outlets.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Great. And that'll be out on the 11th of February?
On the 11th.
Yeah. And we'll have this episode out before then, obviously.
Cool.
Very
good timing.
Cool. Just let everyone know the name of the book and just kind of direct them to where they can find you and how they can order it.
Yeah, it's called Inconceivably Connected. And then the subtitle is A True Story on Shocking DNA Results and Chasing the Unknown. It'll be out on Amazon as a paperback and ebook on the 11th. And I think it should be out on those other sites that I just mentioned before, like Barnes & Noble and Target. Yeah, I think something that's also important to note that is a big part of the book is that chasing the unknown aspect of the title. It's not just about this new DNA discovery, but it's also connected, or at least I find connections that are more in like the spiritual realm through my travels, through psychedelic use, intentional psychedelic use, I should say. And it then leads me to this sort of brush with the paranormal that I had, which was something I never expected to be part of my life. I was very skeptical about any of that existing in the world, but all of these things are tied together in some way, hence the title Inconceivably Connected.
Is this like a DMT ghost you're talking about or something like that?
Not quite. Actually, okay. the ghost portion of the book is a part where I'm stone cold sober. No psychedelics, no added effects included there.
All right.
I guess my other question is, I don't have a copy of the book here. Have you made contact with the donor?
No.
Okay.
So one of the half siblings originally reached out. I don't know how they were able to track down his email, but he eventually responded, and that's the correspondence that I have seen.
You refer to him as a donor and not by name. Is that because he doesn't want to be named?
Correct, or
Gotcha.
At least that's my assumption. And I also want to make sure that I am protected,
legally protected in the
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I've not had direct contact with him.
Gotcha.
Nor is it something that I'm looking for.
Gotcha.
However, if it presented itself to me, I would definitely jump on it because
maybe a second book in the works.
yeah. I mean, who knows? And that's part of the fun of this. Is like,
have any of them made direct contact with him?
Not other than that one email.
Gotcha.
But part of the excitement in putting this book out there is like, I don't know what's going to happen next.
Right.
Like, I don't know who's going to pick this book up and read it and maybe relate to it, maybe relate to it in a way that is directly connected to them. Like the donor's family, for all I know, could pick the book up if it gets that kind of exposure. But I love the fact that it's this never-ending, ongoing thing.
Yeah.
Like, I thrive in the unknown and like the floating around and the what could happen of it all. But other people are kind of the opposite of that, and that's why they tend to just look away from it all and bury it.
Yeah.
I think on the question of like, would I connect with the donor? Do I have interest in that? Again, it's not something that I really think will be part of this story, but you know, I've seen photos of him. I can get a sense of what his personality is like. He's also very into sports in the way that, you know, I've traveled to go to Giants games out in San Francisco. I've gone to playoff games for the Knicks. I see that he's been at games that I may have been at myself.
Wow.
Which is crazy to think about. Where like you're on the bathroom line and your biological father is right there. You don't even know it.
Guys pissing next to each other. You don't even know it.
Yeah. So there have been but moments where, you know, for all any of us knew, we could have crossed paths, which is crazy to think about.
Yeah. So wrapping up, since this is a Lindenhurst-centric podcast.
Yes.
We just wanted to know, like, you know, what some of your favorite places around town.
You've been here 2 years. Yeah. What do you enjoy the most? Lindenhurst kind of changed a lot in the 2 years you've been here.
Okay. Obviously, shout out to Allison Mooney's coffee joint.
Mooney's is great. That's been my go-to spot over here. I really love Hermana's, which is right on Wellwood.
Yeah.
That place, I've had at least one birthday celebration there before. That's a go-to. I love Restoration Kitchen. That's a nice spot. Also, what else? The pizzeria is cool. I'm into that. Although I am partial to Parisi's in Amityville. That is more of my go-to.
Good one.
And other Lindenhurst spots, you know, I'm still exploring. That's part of the fun moving back to the island at this point in my life is I was so just attached to certain restaurants or certain hangouts in Massapequa growing up. I barely left Massapequa. And now that I'm here, part of the fun is just seeing...
Were you ever one of that small army of teenagers that works at All American?
I was not. No. You know, it's funny.
How about the mall?
Not at the mall either.
Really?
I worked at a lot of the pizza places.
Okay.
I did pizza delivery when I was in high school. That was my gig growing up. But
Shout out Phil's too. I used to work at Sports Authority and spent a lot of time in Phil's.
Phil's too.
Yeah.
They had that tube that you drop the coin through and
get it to land on
that
little
thing. I wonder if it's still there. I haven't checked in about a decade, so I don't know. That would be my spots.
Okay.
Whatever the music store is on Wellwood, I like that spot a lot also. I've bought a guitar and a bass from there. Shout out to those guys at Music Arts. Yep.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. That brings us to our final question then. If you could describe Lindenhurst to someone who's never been here, what would you tell them?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm still like figuring out the little details that separate Lindenhurst from some of the other neighboring towns. As a native Long Islander, when I describe living in Long Island to someone who's never been here before,
they would immediately correct you and say living on Long Island.
Correct. Yeah. That's how you know I'm not a Long Islander at heart.
Have you started calling it Montauk Highway instead of Merrick Road?
Oh no, I'll never go there. But I always, as a salesperson, which I am in my day job, I always push the beach factor in the summer. You know, if there's one thing that's going to draw you out here, that differentiates itself from a lot of the other parts of the Northeast, I mean, the beach is where it's at. In the winter, I would throw that question back at you guys. How do you guys find your entertainment or, you know, whatever it is that you do when we're in these colder months?
I stay inside.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, indoor activities. indoor shows,
Yeah,
movies. I still go to theaters,
same.
Yeah.
Yeah, Brooklyn was good with that at Nighthawk Cinema, and I think Alamo Draft House would
Yeah.
have some other, reboots that would come out. The one that stands out, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but it's super trippy, is the Holy Mountain.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I'm with the right
Aronofsky?
guys here.
No, not
Jodorowsky.
Jodorowsky.
They had a screening of
Aronofsky
that.
was Pi.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. Okay.
Requiem for a Dream.
Nighthawk had a screening of that like a year or two ago, and my wife and I went at it was a midnight showing, and it was just to see that on a screen bigger than your own home TV was a trip.
Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks so much for coming on, and best of luck with the book.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you guys for having me, and I look forward to seeing who else comes on the show here. This is a lot of fun, and Lindenhurst has some characters, and I guess I'm one of them now.
Yeah. Welcome.
Long live the bench.